Welcome to From Head to Heart and Home. We are so excited to have you listen in on our conversation today. This channel is created by women, empowering women to take intentional action in creating the life that they want, with your hosts, Carla Center, relationship coach, and myself, Shanda Soretti, certified transformational coach. So, today, what we are talking about is the idea of how resistance leads to leveling up. Okay. So this is a really fun and expansive topic that I'm so excited to dive in with you, Carla, about. And so kind of the preface would be what we're talking about here is the areas in our life where we feel the most resistance or the most we have the most tendencies to avoid, right? Are the areas for our deepest healing to unfold, right? It's where our deepest opportunity for growth is. So it's all about breaking through the resistance to level up to that next level and that next version of yourself. So why don't you kick us off, Carla, and get this conversation started?
I'm excited for this because one of the things, like we talk about patterns and we talk about fear, and this is all tied in with that. Because if you think about it, so say in your relationships, you avoid conflict, right? Which means you're avoiding communication. Somewhere in that avoidance of communication, you believe something's going to happen.
Mm.
And in doing so, you have closed yourself off to some beautiful things that can come when you learn to express yourself and be honest, not only with the other person, but with yourself. So when you're avoiding things like communication, and we call it, I'm just trying not to get into an argument, you're avoiding heading up to this next level in your life where you have been completely transparent, vulnerable, and authentically yourself.
Mm.
Because when you avoid expressing who you are with your words, with your actions, you are shutting off your authentic self. And that's part of that. I'm learning to get out of where I've been conditioned, where I've had all of these fears come up because things have happened. I've been in fight or flight, so I'm holding back. And as you notice the resistance, what am I avoiding? Like Shanda was talking about, this is avoidance. What am I avoiding? And where can this lead me? If we're open to it not leading to some catastrophizing thing, and we're open to this could lead me to the things that I always say I want, but somehow I'm not getting,
Mm.
it can be some of the most beautiful things.
Yeah.
And sometimes we trip up. I'm not saying when you have a conversation with somebody that you've been avoiding that something doesn't come out of it that you're like, see, I knew that was going to happen. But sometimes when we're open to that and we're like, remembering that this has something, if somebody's upset, this has something to do with their own stuff, not with us,
Mm-hmm.
instead of making everything about us. And
Mm.
that's one of the things we do. Other people's actions are reflective of me. Instead of being like, okay, this is about them, but what am I learning about me in this?
Hmm. Oh, I love that. I love that. And you're talking about the honesty piece, right? And I think this is one of our biggest struggles, I think, being honest with ourselves. Our brain is so clever, so sneaky, so tricky, not intentionally like in a malice way, but that's just the way it is, right? And it likes to hide certain things or like beat around the bush and kind of like keep things from us only for our safety, right? So it does come from a place of love at the end of the day, but being honest with ourselves and being willing to communicate honestly and clearly with yourself, right? So I always say, like, it all starts within. And it is the honest truth. It starts within. We cannot give, share, and ripple out what we do not already have for ourselves. And so this is like the number one always, right? If if we want to feel more accepted, it's because we need to accept ourselves, right? So
Yes.
where are we not allowing that for ourselves? So I always like to use the analogy of mirrors, right? And maybe you guys have heard this, Carla. I know you definitely have too, because we talk about this lots, but how the universe is just mirroring everything to you, right? So you might have some really turmoil relationships in your life or uncomfortable relationships in your life. And this is where I want you to start to turn your attention to the most, not the least. I want to encourage you to not shy away from those people or those conversations because there's so much learning there for you. This is the resistance that will help you level up, right? So when you're open to turning around and actually looking at the resistance, at the relationship, at whatever it is that's in front of you and see it for what it is, not for what it isn't, right? And take your responsibility in that, which responsibility is something that Carl and I have talked about before on the channel. So you can go back and you can find that in one of our older episodes. But responsibility is huge, and it can be a heavy weight to lift. But once you learn more about what responsibility really means, it's such a beautiful tool and a beautiful gift and understanding. Because when you understand that you are the sole creator of your life and nothing is being done to you, like you were saying earlier, Carla, then I like to see it as something that is empowering, right? If I look at my past and I'm like, holy cow, look at the life that I created without knowing how powerful I was. Now that I know how powerful I am, what can I create from this new place? Right? So I see it as empowering. I see it as inspiring and hopeful, where when we don't have a full grasp of what responsibility can mean, we can see it as a heavy weight to bear, right? Of like, well, why is that my responsibility to take that on? Right? So it's all about like how you kind of ask the question. And so speaking of question, I think a really powerful question to ask yourself um in those tumultuous, is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah.
Relationships would be like, what am I not willing to see about myself in this situation? Right? Or what could this person be bringing to me as a lesson for me to learn? Right? Like, what gift are they holding behind the things that we think we see? Right? So sometimes our brain will find difficulty in answering specific questions like that. So that's why I'm kind of giving you like a variation of how to ask that question. But it's really about, what about this is to do with me? Like, where can I find myself in this? Where am I doing this to myself?
Right. And if we're putting up all of these barriers because we're like this person, this person, this person, and making it all exterior and happening to us instead of being the creator, like Shanna was just talking about, then we don't learn those lessons and we are attracted to the same kind of people. Your subconscious mind has what feels comfortable. We talk about that all the time. And so if you're not learning your lesson, you're staying in your patterns and you can get rid of somebody and you're going to be attracted to the same kind of person.
Yep.
And for friend and we're not I'm just not talking about romantic relationships, friendships, you'll play the same kind of role at your job. It just happens over and over again, and that's
Mhm.
what we're talking about. When you have that resistance, instead of being like, okay, I'm just gonna here's all the bad things about this and I'm just going to avoid it and I'm going to go this way, you're going to find yourself in the same kind of situation, the same kind of relationships. And really, if you look at yourself and learn those lessons, it it really just opens up. So if you think about it as the more you resist, the more you're closing yourself down, and the more you're open to learning the lessons and looking within, the more you're opening your world up
Mm,
because you're not doing the same patterns. And I can, from my own experience, tell you, like, my romantic relationships were the same over and over and over and over again,
yeah.
and always waiting for the Prince Charming to save me. And I see that a lot with like clients and stuff. Like, somebody's going to rescue me. We're looking for outwardly to
Hmm.
solve our problem.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I think you're making like so many just wonderful points, right? Where it's like it takes a willingness And I always use the word willingness, not ready, not any other word, just the willingness to learn to receive. First of all, how many of us are really not good at receiving, right? That's a
Right.
challenge for people, whether it's compliments, whether it's lessons, whether it's feedback, whatever it is, right? Receiving is a challenge for most people, and a willingness to explore, right? So, and like Carla and I always say, when you're exploring, it's with curiosity from a place of love and non-judgment. But there's the saying, I can't remember who it is, maybe it's Tony Robbins, but the more we resist, the more it persists, right?
Right.
There's a reason for that. If you go back to what we're talking about here, which is how resistance leads to up leveling, the resistance is the actual gift. That is the
Right.
breakthrough, right? So the more that we resist the resistance, okay, without sounding too wordy, the more the universe is like, no, no, you're not getting it. This is your breakthrough here. Like, you
Right.
need to face this. You need to be willing to receive this gift. It's not a like it's not something that's going to hurt you or hinder you. It might come in that type of package. You might perceive it to be that way, but it's actually something that's going to help you level up. So
Right.
the more that we go against that and avoid it and resist it and try to turn away from it, the harder it comes swinging back until we finally, hopefully, receive whatever that gift is so that we can then move forward and up level, so to speak, right?
Right. And so when you're open to that and the internal, and we're not talking about, let me go criticize myself. That's not what we're talking about because that feeds into the resistance.
Mhm.
If I had just been good enough, if I had just been worthy enough, this would happen for me. When really inwardly, if we look inwardly, we take a look at, okay, what's going on? What's my part in it? Am I not loving myself enough to not attract this because I'm attracting people that are critical of me? And why is that? Because I'm critical of me.
Mm.
I'm I'm not attracting people that respect my boundaries. Is that because I don't respect my boundaries? That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that if you stop and look and say, your gift to me was you didn't respect my boundaries. Did that feel good? No. But really, if I think about it, I don't respect my boundaries. I over give and overdo to feel good enough, to feel loved, to feel accepted. And so I attract people that reflect that back to me.
Yeah. Yeah, we teach people how to treat us, right?
Yes.
And we are the ones who tolerate what we tolerate. Nobody
Mhm.
says you have to tolerate this and you don't have to tolerate that. We have our own like program in which we operate from that we get to decide, right? And these operating systems usually come from childhood, right? And we've forgotten that they're outdated and they need to be updated. So that's where the magic comes into play, right? Is
Right.
learning that and then going to work at actually creating these, what I call, sometimes this is going to be funny for anybody in like business world, but like SOPs. So like standard operating procedures, like literally being that
Right.
analytical about it, but like
Right.
writing these manuals for what you're willing to tolerate. And I'm not even talking about what you're willing to tolerate with other people. I mean with you first,
Yep.
right? Are you going to be sneaky behind your own back? Are you going to lie to yourself? Are you going to be someone who throws yourself under the bus? Like that is what we're talking about. That is the gravy in this conversation today, right? Is we need to first be the example, be the role model of how we want to be treated by how we treat ourselves. So, like Carla was
Right.
just saying, if you don't like the way someone's treating you, they're only mirroring how you, in some way, in some aspect, are treating yourself. So pay attention to that. Okay. It's mega. And something that I learned too is that our greatest, hardest classroom being here on earth, right? They call this like earth school. Our hardest classroom with the most lessons are within our family. That is
Yep.
where most of the mind blowing deepest shifts, deepest healing unfold are with the people within our family. And I can totally attest to that with my background and my experience and what I've been through. And there's always more work to do, right? There's always more healing to unfold. So the work's never done. And the more willing you are to explore what those might be for you, the more leveling up you'll have access to, right? The more expansive evolution or um, versions of yourself you'll be able to gain access to. There we go.
Right. And, our parents and our siblings are our greatest teachers. And the moment that we're like, I'm responsible for my part in our relationship, and let me look at what role I play in it, instead of like, my parents did all of this to me,
Mm,
because that can be one of the things I feel like over and over again can happen. We're like, they did this to me, and I'm this way because they did this to me, and I'm this way because they did this to me. And if we look in and like, okay, what's my part? Like,
mm,
am I very quiet when they say something to me and I never speak up about? They should know how it makes me feel. They should understand that I can't do things because of how they communicate with me.
mm.
Are you
Yeah.
looking at your part in the communication? Are you looking at your avoidance in what you believe is going to turn out badly? Like I said in the beginning, taking a look at your relationships and your communication and your how you act with your family can show you how you're going to act with other people, because your core family really does set up that operating system, because it's from childhood, like
Yeah.
Shanda was saying earlier. And unless we break the cycles that our subconscious mind, the patterns, we're going to keep continuing it through, like, even if I'm going to avoid my family what's all altogether and never talk to them again. Okay, but what lessons am I going to learn? Am I just going to keep just stepping away from everybody and not learning the lessons that are right there in front of me, and keep myself in the same space?
Well, and here's the interesting thing too, Carl, like what you were just saying. If you are someone, and I mean, I want to say that this is like across the board, right? And I'm going on a limb here to say that, but if you're someone who does avoid your family because of X, Y, and Z, that is one of your patterns,
Mm-hmm.
right? Avoidance, running away from. So it's like, think of all the lessons you are missing out on. Think of all the learning that's there, waiting to be tapped into, waiting to be healed, right? That you're just like, because of valid reasons. I'm totally not saying that this is not valid and your experiences aren't valid, because they are. So, for very valid reasons, you have decided that that is a strategy that works for you, and it then turns into a pattern. So, where else are you doing that in your life, right? There's the wheel of life with the 5 or 7 or sometimes 9 areas. So look at, like, in your finances, look at in your love life, look at in your health and all the other ones too. Where are you repeating these same patterns? And something that I learned, and I'm telling you, when I learned this as a parent, I was like, holy hot damn. That's a big one. It was a doozy, but so important. Our children show us what we have not yet healed within ourselves.
Yep.
And when I learned that, I got goosebumps right now. When I learned that, I was like mind blown, because I could look at my son and be like, oh my gosh, I can see some of these things so clearly. Some of the things I don't know yet because he's still young. So they're
Right.
not showing up yet, but there's stuff that's coming down the pipeline. But so, you know, look at your kids, no matter what age they are, look at your children
Mhm.
from that lens of not what's wrong with you, right? Gabor Mate said it so perfectly. He said, we ask the wrong question when it comes to like trauma. And trauma,
Yes.
again, is anything that you had a very strong reaction to, like your nervous system, right? So he
Yeah.
said, instead of asking what's wrong with you, which is what typically people ask people,
Right.
we need to be asking what happened, right? So when we look at our children using that lens of, where are all of my unhealed pieces showing up in my children, and how are they living those out? How are they a reminder, a beautiful reminder? Sometimes uncomfortable reminder, but a beautiful reminder of the things that are waiting for you to heal,
Right.
right? I just think it's such a beautiful opportunity. Now, it's not always easy. It can be a hard pill to swallow, right? But this
Right.
work isn't easy. If it was easy, we'd all be doing it. We'd all be hunky dory and life would be just grand. But that's not what this life here on earth is about. It's not an easy process, but it's always, always worth the work that you put in. And I will say that whatever you're willing to put in is what you will get out, right? So the depths of which you're willing to explore will be the depths of which the healing you get to enjoy on the other side.
Beautifully said. And you will, my kids are adults, you will see those parts in your adult children. And some of those were my wake up calls where I'm like, oh my gosh, I see this in my child from what was in me. It is time, heartbreaking
Mm,
that I didn't learn my lesson, so they got the same lesson. Um, but the beauty that I can see in it is that I'm learning it and sharing with them, right?
yeah,
And so that's one of those things about if you are curious, if you are compassionate with yourself, if you are honest with yourself, not from a critical, but like, okay, this is happening for my children. What is going on with me? And not out of a, let me say I'm a bad parent, but
right.
let me see, I didn't see this. Maybe I just didn't want to see this. Maybe it was there and I was afraid to really dive into the healing with it. But whatever it is, the beauty in saying, I see this in my child and I see this in myself. Let me work at it and
Mhm.
share with them, not as a, did you know you did this and shame on you? Or just saying, hey, I know that some of this I shared, you grew up with this. So I'm sharing with you how I changed this. And maybe it will be helpful to you,
Yeah.
is how I always frame it. I don't ever go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. I told you not to do that. And having adult children, it can be that way. Like, oh, I told you not to. And then you're like, oh, but I showed them.
Hmm.
I showed them this way to be. My resistance was so flashing red light. I didn't want to accept it that they are like, ooh, yeah, let me follow because that for some reason that's dangerous.
Yeah. Okay. So many things here. I'm just like, ah. So I love that. I'll go kind of backwards. So what you said
Okay.
last was it reminded me of um, the saying, actions speak louder than words, right?
Mhm.
And so I took a parenting course last year, which was really cool. And because I'm just like, why not, right? And they were saying something along these lines of like, if you want your kids to do something, you don't tell them, you show them.
Yep.
You show them by acting it out. You set the example of whatever it is, if it's an expectation or whatnot. And yes, for children, we're allowed to have certain expectations, right? So I wouldn't say like in a maybe like a marriage or something, but when they're like that's our job, right? Until they reach a certain age to guide them, to teach them. And then circling back further to what you were saying about the heartbreak of like watching our kids go through something that we weren't able to maybe heal before they came into our lives. You said it's heartbreaking. Yes, you also said it's beautiful. And I'm glad that you did follow it up with that because our kids go through some of the things that we went through. Maybe it looks different, like maybe the situations or the circumstances were different, but they end up with the same lesson to be learned, right?
Right.
And we need to understand that they're also on their own journey too, and trusting that whatever, for whatever reason, they also came here to learn that lesson, right?
Right.
So it's also a part of their evolution. So, because it can be like you were saying, it can be really hard to feel like, oh, shoot, like I didn't mean to pass that down, like that was an accident, or, you know, and feel really like guilt and have regret about it. But we don't want to get stuck there, right? We
Right.
first of all want to heal it for ourselves as soon as we see it. And then, like Carla was saying, teach them how to move through it, whatever age they're at, whether they're children still or whether they're teenagers or adults, right? Like sharing that knowledge and that wisdom with them so that they can then heal it for themselves too, right? And grow into that more expansive version of themselves as well. And then again, that's where we start to break those chains, right? And break
Right.
the chains of trauma and generational trauma of passing things on, right? But we don't know what we know until we know it. So that's why I say we can
Right.
never beat ourselves up for doing a certain thing or not doing a certain thing when we had no idea. It wasn't even in our realm of consciousness at that time. So give yourself that love and that compassion and that grace and just say, okay, now that I know, what can I do moving forward?
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like we've like really kind of gone in, come out. Is there anything else
Great.
that you want to sprinkle on top of this conversation, or do you feel like we shared the cherry on top?
I think that that was the cherry on top. It was beautiful. And just remember when you're doing this, love, compassion, non-judgment, um, not only for others, but for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we always recommend, journaling, taking some time to write some thoughts down. Maybe you're having some thoughts come up. Maybe you have beliefs coming up. Maybe you have feelings coming up. Jot those down, and come and revisit them later or sit with it and do a little bit of journaling or some meditation, right? Everything that comes up is, I always say, ready to be worked on, ready to be healed. So don't just kind of let those pieces, go by. Like actually grab hold of them, be willing to explore them, and find out what gift they have ready for you to unlock. So thank you, Carla, for joining me in this beautiful conversation. Thank you to all the listeners for tuning into our channel today from Head to Heart and Home. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, then make sure that you hit the subscribe button below so that you get our notifications when our episodes come out each and every week. Also, if you feel like someone else could benefit from hearing this message today, please share this episode with them. And last but not least, be sure to join us next week for another connected conversation. We'll see you then. Bye bye.